They say some houses never forget. On Providence's historic Benefit Street, there's one colonial home whose cobblestones still echo with voices no one alive should ever hear. For centuries, neighbors whispered about children's cries that drifted up from the basement, voices that sang hymns in strange, broken languages. But when authorities finally forced their way inside in 1765, what they discovered was so disturbing that the records were sealed for over 100 years. This is the story of Deacon Ezra Rutherford, a man of faith, a respected leader, and the keeper of a secret that turned his basement into a tomb. Before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed to our channel and hit that notification bell, because once you hear what was uncovered beneath Rutherford's home, you'll never think of devotion the same way again. The house on Benefit Street. The Rutherford House still stands today, a tall colonial mansion that once symbolized Puritan wealth and power. But beneath its stone foundation, something dark was hiding, something no community wanted to admit existed. In the 1760s, Providence was a city caught in conflict. On one hand, it was deeply religious, still holding on to the strict Puritan values of its founders. On the other hand, it was becoming a busy port town, flooded with sailors, merchants, and ideas from across the world. Ships came in heavy with rum, sugar, and, though few dared to speak it aloud, slaves. That trade brought wealth, but it also brought contradictions that ate away at the colony's soul. Into this divided world stepped Deacon Ezra Rutherford. A man of faith and secrets. Ezra was hard to miss. He stood over 6 feet tall, a giant in a time when most men were much shorter. His gray eyes were piercing, almost unsettling, as though he could see through your lies straight into your soul. When he spoke from the pulpit at the First Baptist Church, grown men wept. Merchants who cheated their customers, sailors who drank away their wages, all felt judged when Ezra thundered about sin and salvation. He owned 3 merchant ships, ironically named the Mercy, the Providence, and the Salvation. They carried goods between New England and the Caribbean, fueling his fortune. Yet his wealth weighed heavily on him. Ezra hated the way money corrupted his city. He preached against vanity, against taverns and brothels, against the kind of worldly living he secretly studied with almost obsessive interest. At home, his life seemed pious. He lived with his young wife, Mercy, 20 years his junior. She had married him for his reputation and his promise of stability, but their marriage carried one great sorrow: they could not conceive a child. For 5 long years, Providence gossiped about their childless home. Ezra believed it was a punishment from God. Mercy quietly blamed herself. A turning point. Then, in the spring of 1762, Mercy finally became pregnant. Ezra was overjoyed, convinced it was a sign from God, a reward for his faithfulness. But as the months passed, something in him began to change. His sermons grew darker. He spoke less about God's mercy and more about the corruption of innocence. He preached that children were born pure but poisoned by the world from their very first breath. He began spending more and more time in the basement of his house. He claimed it was for prayer and communion with God, but neighbors whispered that strange sounds came from beneath the ground. Faint singing, children's voices, melodies that sounded almost like church hymns, until you listened closely and felt the shiver run down your spine. Shadows in the streets. Ezra withdrew from society. He no longer joined dinners with other merchants, no longer lingered after church services. Even at home, Mercy noticed a new intensity in his eyes, especially when he watched children playing in the street. It was not the look of a father-to-be. It was something colder, sharper, as though he was studying a problem that only he understood. He wandered the docks at night, claiming he was studying sin so he could better combat it. But in truth, the sights of taverns and brothels fascinated him. They reminded him of everything his strict self-control had denied him. And as Providence gave itself more to wealth and pleasure, Ezra began to feel like the only righteous man left. The night of October 17, 1762. On a gray, wind-lashed morning in mid-October, Mercy went into labor. The air was heavy, the harbor silent, as though the whole city was holding its breath. Ezra prayed feverishly in the basement, convinced this birth was a holy event. He believed his child would be different, untouched by the corruption of the outside world. But what exactly did he intend to do to keep that purity safe? Neighbors later reported hearing cries from the house that day, first Mercy's cries of pain, then something else. Softer, smaller, the voices of infants. But the strange part, those cries didn't stop after a few hours. They didn't even stop after a few days. Instead, they blended into those eerie hymns that would soon haunt Benefit Street for years to come. Right finger, and that's where part 1 leaves us. What exactly was Ezra planning for his newborn children? And why would their voices echo beneath the earth for more than 2 centuries? In part 2, we'll explore how Ezra's obsession with purity twisted into something terrifying, and how Providence tried, and failed, to bury the truth. Don't forget to comment below with what state you're listening from, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of this haunting true story. That's part 1 rewritten. Still chilling, but an easy-to-follow storytelling for YouTube with an engaging opening, cliffhanger ending, and simple language for narration. Do you want me to go ahead and plan out all 10 parts with rough summaries first, like an episode roadmap, or should I write part 2 in full next? Part 2: The Birth That Changed Providence Forever. Studio microphone hook. October 17, 1762. The sky over Providence was heavy with storm clouds, the kind that seemed to press down on the earth itself. Inside the Rutherford mansion, a different kind of storm was unfolding, a birth that would alter not only a family but the very soul of a city. What started as a moment of joy quickly twisted into something darker. For most families, the cries of newborn children bring hope. But for Deacon Ezra Rutherford, those cries were a call, a sign that God demanded something extraordinary of him. Stay with us as we unravel what happened the night twins Samuel and Judith Rutherford were born, and how their father's obsession turned their cradle into a prison. A house full of shadows. By the time Goodwife Prescott, the midwife, arrived with her satchel of herbs and tools, the entire Rutherford house felt charged with a strange energy. Servants had been sent away. Ezra insisted childbirth was too sacred for the eyes of hired help. That left only Ezra, Mercy, and the experienced midwife to face what was already proving to be a long, painful delivery. Upstairs, Ezra paced like a man possessed. His heavy footsteps echoed through the floorboards, keeping rhythm with his wife's contractions. He had gone nearly 2 days without sleep, sustained only by water and scripture. He read aloud from the Bible, passages about birth, blessings, and divine purpose, his voice trembling with exhaustion and feverish devotion. Downstairs, Mercy fought each wave of pain as if it were her enemy. Goodwife Prescott had delivered countless children over the decades, but something about this room unsettled her. Despite the blazing fire in the hearth, the air was unnaturally cold. Shadows along the walls didn't seem to follow the fire's flickering, but moved on their own, twisting into strange shapes. The first cry. At exactly 9:07 in the morning, the first child arrived. A healthy baby boy with a strong cry that pierced the silence of the house. Ezra dropped to his knees in thanks, tears streaming down his face as he shouted praises that echoed through the halls. The boy was named Samuel. He had dark hair like his father, a sturdy body, and a voice that announced strength. He looked like he belonged to the world. But Goodwife Prescott wasn't finished. She felt another stirring, another life. The omen of twins. "'Tis not over yet, Deacon," she warned. "Another child is coming." Ezra froze. His gray eyes, already burning with sleeplessness, hardened into something more intense, something that made the midwife instinctively step back. Twins were rare. Some saw them as a double blessing, others as a troubling omen. And here they were, born into the household of Providence's most famous religious leader. 12 minutes later, Judith entered the world. Smaller than her brother, delicate, with auburn hair like her mother's. Her cry was softer, almost musical, and she calmed the moment she was placed beside Samuel. Goodwife Prescott was struck by their connection. Even as newborns, the twins reached for one another. When one shifted, the other followed. When one cried, the other turned toward the sound. In 30 years of practice, she had never seen such instinctive unity. She declared them the healthiest, finest twins she had ever delivered. But when Ezra held them in his arms, his joy was shadowed by something else, fear. Ezra's revelation. Standing at the upstairs window, Ezra looked down onto Benefit Street. He saw young men stumbling home from taverns, laughing crudely, their clothes wrinkled and dirty. To him, they were the embodiment of corruption, proof that the world below was sick and sinful. Then he looked at the twins in his arms. Two perfect souls, untouched, pure, innocent, and in that moment, Ezra decided, they would never be corrupted. This was his divine mission. Unlike other parents, who would one day watch their children fall into sin, Ezra believed he had been chosen by God to preserve innocence forever. Hiding the truth. 3 days later, Providence expected to hear the joyous announcement. Families awaited invitations to visit the house, to congratulate the deacon and meet the children. But Ezra refused. Instead, he told a handful of church members that Mercy's labor had been long and difficult, and that the children were too fragile for company. People nodded and accepted his explanation, but whispers began. Why was the city's most respected preacher hiding his children? Behind closed doors, Ezra was already putting his plan into action. The basement sanctuary. Beneath the Rutherford mansion was a vast stone basement, cool in summer and warm in winter. Thick walls muffled the sound of the busy street above. Ezra had once used the largest room as a study for his theological work. But now, he saw it differently. This would become a sanctuary. A place where the twins could grow without ever touching the corruption of the outside world. He worked in secret while Mercy slept, exhausted from childbirth. Slowly, he transformed the underground chambers. Oil lamps were installed in carved alcoves, designed to burn steadily with no flickering shadows. He wanted constant, calm light, soft enough for young eyes, pure enough to symbolize divine presence. He laid down Persian rugs, more expensive than most families could ever afford, covering the cold stone floors. He built small beds from pine, carved with Bible verses that praised innocence and purity. He carefully arranged areas for eating, sleeping, and prayer. Every detail was planned with a merchant's precision and a zealot's devotion. Ezra was creating what he called in his private prayers, the sanctuary of preservation. A mother's unease. Mercy, still weak from the birth, sensed something was wrong. Ezra seemed distant, even more severe than before. When he looked at the twins, she saw pride in his eyes, but also something else. A hunger, a need. He whispered to her that they had been given a holy gift, and it was their duty to keep the children pure. At first, she nodded, too tired to argue. But as days passed, she began to realize Ezra's idea of purity did not mean raising the children in faith. It meant something far stranger, something that would soon test every ounce of her love and courage. Right finger. That's where part 2 leaves us. Ezra has built a hidden sanctuary beneath his home, convinced it's the only way to keep his twins free from corruption. But how long can he hide them from Providence? And what will happen when his obsession turns from preservation to control? In part 3, we'll step deeper into the basement, into a world where innocence becomes captivity, and where devotion begins to look a lot like damnation. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments what state you're watching from. We love hearing from our mystery family. This version keeps the creepy, historical horror vibe, but in easy, suspenseful narration that fits a YouTube storytelling format, with a strong hook and cliffhanger to keep viewers coming back for part 3. Would you like me to also draft a 10-part outline roadmap so you know exactly how the story unfolds across the whole series, or just keep writing each full part one by one? Part 3. The basement becomes a sanctuary. Studio microphone hook. Imagine a nursery built underground. No windows, no sunlight, no chance of seeing the world above. Just oil lamps, stone walls, and the constant voice of scripture echoing through the dark. That was the childhood Ezra Rutherford prepared for his newborn twins. To him, it wasn't a prison. It was a holy sanctuary. A place where innocence could be preserved forever. But as the winter of 1762 deepened, that sanctuary began to look less like heaven, and more like a trap. Ezra's hidden design. Ezra Rutherford wasn't just a preacher. He was also a merchant, a planner, a man who thrived on details. And when it came to his children, no detail was too small. In the basement beneath his mansion, he built what he called the Sanctuary of Preservation. The walls were lined with thick stone to block sound. Fresh air flowed through hidden vents he had carefully designed, keeping the space cool in summer and warm in winter. He set up a dining table sized perfectly for a growing family, surrounded by sturdy wooden chairs. The table was always prepared, dishes neatly in place, pewter plates and cups that reflected his belief that simplicity was holy, while luxury was dangerous. At the far end of the room, he built an altar. Here, scripture would be read aloud every day. Hymns would be sung. Prayers would rise into the darkness like smoke. A library without questions. Along one wall stood shelves filled with books. But not just any books. Ezra handpicked every volume. Multiple Bibles in different translations. The writings of early church fathers. Collections of hymns. Poetry that praised God. Theological commentaries that agreed with Ezra's strict beliefs. Missing were the voices of the wider world. No philosophy, no history, no science. Ezra would not risk exposing his children to ideas that challenged his vision of purity. When Mercy asked why he spent so much time underground, Ezra told her he was building a nursery. A place warmer, safer, quieter than the upper floors. And in truth, the basement was warmer and less drafty than most colonial homes. Infant mortality was high in Providence, and Ezra's reasoning made sense. But what he didn't tell her was that the nursery was more than a shelter. It was a fortress, one entrance, one heavy oak door, locked from the outside. Windows too high to see through. Walls so thick that no cry could escape. A nursery that was also a prison. Convincing Mercy. As November winds cut through Providence, Ezra began the second phase of his plan, persuasion. He told Mercy that the twins needed peace and quiet to grow. Visitors, with their well-meaning noise and germs, could make them sick, or worse. Even Drive, Hamilton, Providence's most respected physician, had warned against too many visitors in the early months. Ezra argued further. It wasn't just physical disease the children had to fear. It was spiritual disease. Every careless word, every worldly influence, could corrupt their souls. Mercy was still weak from childbirth, still unsure of herself as a new mother. She wanted peace. She wanted rest. And Ezra, with his booming voice and endless certainty, convinced her. At first, she told herself it would only be for a few weeks. Life below ground. When Ezra finally revealed the completed nursery, Mercy was surprised. The basement was beautiful, in its own way. Oil lamps glowed warmly. Rugs softened the stone floors. Tiny carved beds stood ready for Samuel and Judith. It felt safe. It felt holy. The first month passed quietly. Mercy nursed the twins and read aloud from the carefully chosen books. Ezra joined them for morning and evening prayers, his voice filling the stone chamber. He began teaching hymns even before the twins could focus their eyes, convinced that sacred music would shape their souls from the very start. The daily rhythm seemed peaceful, almost normal. For a moment, Mercy believed this strange arrangement might actually work. Ezra tightens control. But Ezra's faith was not satisfied with peace. Each week, his rules became stricter. He told Mercy she should spend less time upstairs. Each trip into the world risked contaminating her soul, and by extension, the twins. Even servants in the house, he said, carried corruption on their breath, their hands, their thoughts. At first, Mercy resisted. She prepared special meals in the upstairs kitchen, kept up with correspondence, tended to household needs. But Ezra grew restless whenever she left. He paced the floor, muttered prayers, and only calmed when she returned. His relief was so intense, so raw, that Mercy began to feel guilty for leaving at all. Bread and water. Meals also changed. Where once Ezra had provided his wife with fine meats and imported goods, now he argued that such luxuries were sinful. A pure life required a pure diet. Simple bread, milk, and water. No gluttony. No distraction. Only what was necessary for survival and prayer. Mercy accepted it quietly, though in her heart she longed for warmth, comfort, and the social world she had once known. The walls close in. Slowly, without realizing it, Mercy became completely isolated. Cut off from friends, family, and neighbors, she depended entirely on Ezra for news of the outside world. And the news he brought was always grim. Stories of children lying, stealing, falling into vice before they could even walk. Families collapsing into sin. Even the church, he claimed, was turning worldly. Each story fed his argument. The world above was too far gone. The only hope for Samuel and Judith was eternal separation from it. A different face in public. To the people of Providence, Ezra still appeared as their stern but respected deacon. But those who looked closely saw something had changed. His sermons grew darker, filled with vivid warnings about corruption spreading like disease. He no longer offered comfort to sinners. Instead, he spoke of drastic measures, heroic sacrifices, and purity preserved at all costs. He looked at children in the congregation not with tenderness, but with a kind of detached study, cataloging their flaws, their sins, their failures. Ezra Rutherford was no longer preaching salvation. He was building an argument, a dangerous theology, one that would justify whatever came next. Right finger, and that's where part 3 leaves us. Inside the basement, Samuel and Judith lived in a carefully crafted sanctuary that looked holy but functioned as a prison. Above ground, Ezra's sermons grew stranger, his eyes colder. In part 4, we'll see how the twins grew inside their underground world, and how Ezra's obsession began to twist not only their childhood but their very humanity. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss it. And tell us in the comments, would you have trusted Ezra's plan, or would you have fought to keep the twins above ground? This version keeps it chilling but digestible for a YouTube audience, with a strong intro hook, simplified storytelling, and a cliffhanger for part 4. Part 4: Children of the Basement. Studio microphone hook. By the spring of 1763, the Rutherford twins had never felt the sun on their skin. They had never touched grass, never seen the harbor that stretched wide before Providence. To Samuel and Judith, the basement was the entire world: stone walls, oil lamps, and the voice of their father echoing scripture through the dim light. But innocence, even in the purest sanctuary, cannot last forever. What Ezra Rutherford called preservation, others might call something far darker. The basement becomes their world. By the time the twins were 6 months old, the basement nursery had become their permanent home. Mercy, pale and weary, spent nearly every waking moment underground. She rocked Samuel in her arms, soothed Judith's cries, and tried to pretend that this life was normal. At first, the arrangement almost seemed practical. The basement was warm, free of drafts, and safe from the diseases that swept through Providence each winter. Neighbors above ground whispered about why no one had seen the children, but Ezra dismissed them. God gave us these souls, he told Mercy one night as they prayed before the altar. And he demands we keep them unspotted from the world. His words carried such authority that Mercy could only nod. Early lessons. Ezra believed that spiritual training must begin immediately, before the children even learned to walk. Every morning, he read scripture aloud to the infants, his deep voice booming against the stone walls. He sang hymns, insisting that the rhythm of holy music would shape their spirits before language itself took hold. As Samuel and Judith grew stronger, Ezra introduced simple routines. He placed small wooden crosses in their hands, guiding their fingers to trace the shape. He bent their tiny heads toward the altar, teaching them to kneel long before they could stand on their own. Mercy found this strange, but Ezra's certainty was overwhelming. To question him felt like questioning God. A mother's doubts. Still, doubt gnawed at her. At night, when the twins slept, Mercy would press her ear against the stone wall and imagine the sounds of the city outside, the creak of wagon wheels, the call of sailors, the laughter of children running along the street. She thought of her own childhood, poor though it was, filled with open skies and meadows. What would become of Samuel and Judith if they never saw the world? But each time she considered speaking up, Ezra's stern face silenced her. "Would you feed them poison?" he asked once, when she suggested a short walk in the garden. "Then why would you expose them to the poison of the world?" Mercy bowed her head and said nothing. Ezra's public face. Above ground, Ezra was changing in ways the town could not ignore. His sermons at the First Baptist Church grew harsher. Gone were the hopeful calls for redemption. Instead, he thundered warnings about the corruption of children, about innocence stolen before it could blossom. He described Providence as a city sinking into sin, a place where even the youngest souls were at risk. His words made parents clutch their children tighter in the pews. But more disturbing was the way Ezra looked at those children. Witnesses later said he studied them like specimens, his gray eyes cold, calculating, as though measuring their innocence against his private standard. The twins begin to notice. By the time Samuel and Judith turned 1, they had begun to recognize the boundaries of their world. They crawled across Persian rugs but never beyond the stone walls. They pointed at the high windows, where pale shafts of light sometimes slipped through, but Ezra discouraged their curiosity. "The world above is filled with corruption," he told them, his voice firm. "Here below, you are safe." The twins grew unusually close, bound not just by blood but by isolation. They spoke to each other in half-formed sounds, sometimes falling into rhythms that sounded disturbingly like hymns. Mercy was both comforted and unsettled by their strange connection. Rules grow stricter. Ezra's demands tightened as the months passed. Mercy was no longer permitted upstairs except for brief errands. Even those trips filled her with guilt, for Ezra would question her endlessly upon her return. Who had she spoken to? What had she seen? Did she notice any signs of sin? Food grew simpler, almost ritualistic: bread, milk, water, and occasionally thin broth. Ezra insisted that physical hunger kept the soul sharp. He spent long nights in prayer, his muttered words seeping through the cracks of the house. Servants whispered about strange noises, but none dared question him. Stories of the outside. Mercy began to tell the children stories in secret. She spoke softly while Ezra was away, describing trees, rivers, and the bright blue of the sky. Samuel's eyes lit up at these tales. Judith would press her tiny hand against her mother's lips, as though sensing the danger in speaking of forbidden things. When Ezra returned, Samuel sometimes pointed upward, babbling sounds that suggested curiosity. Ezra's face would darken. He would lift the boy onto his knee and whisper warnings about the evil above. Judith, by contrast, stayed silent, clinging to her brother's hand. Ezra's growing obsession. In the spring of 1763, Ezra began writing again. Not business records, not sermons, but private journals. Pages upon pages of theological arguments, carefully justifying what he was doing. He wrote of the twins as the experiment of Providence, souls preserved in a holy sanctuary. He recorded their smallest gestures, their cries, even their breathing patterns, as though gathering evidence for some divine case. When he preached on Sundays, his words carried the weight of this obsession. He spoke of a chosen remnant, of children who could be saved only through separation from the world. His eyes seemed to burn with certainty, frightening even those who had once adored him. Whispers in Providence. Neighbors began to talk. Why had no one seen the Rutherford children? Why did Mercy never leave the house? Why did Ezra's sermons sound less like guidance and more like warnings from a man who had glimpsed something terrible? Some said Mercy was ill. Others whispered that the twins had died and that Ezra's grief had driven him to madness. But the truth was darker still. A new restriction. By the summer of 1763, Ezra announced a new rule: Mercy was not to leave the basement at all. "The outside clings to you," he told her one evening, his hand heavy on her shoulder. "Every step into the world brings danger back to our children. Stay here, with them. Be their shield." Mercy wanted to protest, but Samuel stirred in his crib, Judith began to cry, and Ezra's stern gaze silenced her. She lowered her head and agreed. The atmosphere changes. That summer, the basement began to feel different. What had once seemed warm and protective now felt stifling. The air, though carefully circulated, seemed heavy. The oil lamps cast shadows that danced too long on the walls. And at night, when Ezra prayed upstairs, Mercy thought she heard whispers in the stone. Faint, childlike voices, not Samuel, not Judith, singing something that was almost a hymn, but broken, twisted. She told herself it was imagination. But deep down, she knew, something unnatural was stirring. Right finger, that's where part 4 ends. The twins are growing inside a sanctuary that looks like protection but feels like a prison. Ezra's sermons are turning darker, and whispers have begun to seep from the walls themselves. In part 5, we'll uncover the strange rituals Ezra begins to perform, and how the line between preservation and possession begins to blur. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell, and let us know in the comments, do you think Ezra truly believed he was saving his children, or was he already lost to madness? That's part 4 rewritten, suspenseful, easy to follow, with a strong hook, creepy details, and a cliffhanger leading into part 5. Part 5 Rituals in the Dark. Studio microphone hook. By the summer of 1763, the Rutherford twins had never known the touch of sunlight. But something else had begun to touch them, something that moved in the shadows, fed by Ezra's growing obsession. The basement was no longer just a nursery. It was becoming a temple. And temples demand sacrifice. The summer heat. Providence sweltered that summer. Outside, the streets buzzed with trade, gossip, and the smell of salt drifting in from the harbor. But in the Rutherford basement, time felt frozen. Ezra had adjusted the vents so carefully that no trace of summer air reached below. The twins never smelled flowers, never heard cicadas, never felt a warm breeze. Instead, their world was lit by the steady glow of oil lamps and bound by Ezra's unbending rules. Ezra's new doctrine. Ezra's journals had grown thicker, filled with furious writing in the margins, underlined scripture, and strange diagrams that Mercy could not understand. One night, he gathered Mercy and the twins before the altar and announced, "The Lord has spoken. Our work here is not only to protect. It is to prepare. Innocence must be strengthened by ritual, purified by discipline. Only then will Samuel and Judith be vessels uncorrupted." From that night forward, their daily prayers were no longer gentle recitations. Ezra introduced rituals, small at first, then darker with each passing week. The ritual of silence. The first ritual was simple: silence. At dawn, Ezra demanded that the family sit together in stillness for 1 full hour. No words, no sounds, only breathing. He claimed silence cleansed the spirit, blocking out the noise of the sinful world above. Samuel, restless and curious, struggled. He squirmed, babbled, tapped the floor with his little fists. Ezra's face would tighten with disappointment, and he would place a firm hand on the boy's shoulder until Samuel stilled. Judith, by contrast, obeyed easily. She sat with wide, unblinking eyes, clutching her brother's hand. Even as a toddler, she seemed to understand what Ezra wanted. Mercy worried. Children were not meant for such quiet. But Ezra insisted. They must learn early. Purity requires discipline. Strange carvings. By midsummer, Ezra had begun carving symbols into the wooden beams of the basement. Some were familiar, crosses, verses in Latin. Others were strange, curling shapes that Mercy did not recognize. When she asked about them, Ezra replied only, "They are wards." Protection against the corruption pressing against these walls. But at night, Mercy sometimes swore the carvings seemed to move in the lamplight. Shadows lengthened in ways that did not follow the flame. Once, as she rocked Judith to sleep, she heard a faint scratching, like claws dragging across the wood. When she looked, the carvings seemed deeper than before. The ritual of hunger. The second ritual was harder. Ezra decreed that once each week, the family would fast together. Mercy and the children were given only water for an entire day. "It is not the body that must be fed," Ezra intoned, "but the soul." Samuel cried bitterly during these days, reaching for food that was not there. Mercy wanted to sneak him bread, but Ezra's eyes were everywhere. Judith, though weak, endured silently. She pressed her head against Samuel's shoulder, comforting him with quiet presence. Mercy saw in her daughter a strange resilience that frightened her almost as much as Ezra's obsession. The night service. Then came the night service. Once a month, Ezra woke the family at midnight. He led them in candlelight to the altar, where he chanted scripture in a voice that did not sound entirely his own. The twins, half asleep, were forced to kneel as Ezra prayed over them, sometimes placing his hands on their heads, sometimes tracing the strange carvings onto their skin with oil. Mercy noticed his prayers no longer followed the Bible exactly. He spoke of preserving vessels, of binding corruption in stone, of purity tested by darkness. The words chilled her, but when she asked, he only smiled and said, "The Spirit gives new words when old ones are no longer enough." The twins respond. By their second birthday, Samuel and Judith were no longer ordinary children. They spoke little, but their connection deepened in eerie ways. When Samuel cried, Judith cried too, even if she was across the room. When Judith pointed to something, Samuel's eyes followed as though he already knew. Ezra praised this bond as divine. "They are as one," he declared. Proof that separation from the world makes them stronger. But Mercy sometimes woke at night to find them standing together at the foot of her bed, staring silently. Their faces were calm, almost blank, their small hands tightly clasped. She began to dream of them whispering in a language she did not know. Ezra's public decline. Above ground, Ezra's sermons had become terrifying. He spoke of a coming judgment, of children born for holy purposes while the rest of the world drowned in sin. He thundered that parents must be willing to do anything, to protect their children from corruption. Some townspeople began to avoid his church. Others whispered that Deacon Rutherford had gone mad. But a few, always the most fearful, the most desperate, leaned closer, hanging on every word. They whispered that perhaps Ezra had received visions. Perhaps he truly knew the path to salvation. Ezra fed on their attention. But he told no one of the sanctuary below. That secret, he insisted, was for Providence. Alone. The third ritual. By autumn, Ezra introduced his most unsettling ritual yet. He called it, the test of shadows. He would snuff out every lamp until the basement was swallowed in darkness. Then he would command Samuel and Judith to walk hand in hand across the room toward the altar. "Fear nothing," he whispered from the blackness. "The world above is shadows. Only faith will guide you." The twins never stumbled. Somehow, they always reached the altar, their small footsteps sure, their breathing calm. Mercy, however, shivered in the darkness. More than once, she swore she heard other footsteps, soft, dragging, too many to belong to just the children. And once, she felt a cold hand brush against her arm. Whispers in the walls. By late 1763, the whispers Mercy had once imagined were unmistakable. They came strongest during the fasts and the night services, high, thin voices, singing fragments of hymns twisted out of tune. Ezra insisted this was proof of the world's corruption pressing against them, trying to reach the twins. "The darker it grows outside," he said, "the more vital it is that we remain pure." But Mercy began to fear something else, that Ezra's rituals were not keeping corruption out, but drawing it in. Cliffhanger. One night, after a midnight service, Mercy awoke to find Samuel and Judith gone from their beds. Her heart pounded as she searched the basement in the flicker of a dying lamp. At last, she found them before the altar, standing hand in hand, their eyes wide open in the darkness. But it was not Ezra's voice they were repeating in unison. It was another voice, low, ancient, and utterly inhuman. And when Mercy whispered their names, they did not turn. Right finger that ends part 5. The children have begun to change, molded by Ezra's rituals and perhaps touched by something far older than his faith. In part 6, we'll see just how deep Ezra's obsession goes, and what happens when the town of Providence starts asking questions he cannot ignore. Part 6 Providence starts to notice. Studio microphone hook. The Rutherford twins were growing in darkness, molded by Ezra's strange rituals. But while he was building his secret sanctuary below, the city of Providence was starting to whisper. Neighbors heard strange sounds at night, and the deacon's sermons had become so fiery that some began to fear he was no longer speaking for God at all. And what the townsfolk suspected was only the beginning. Rumors on Benefit Street. By the winter of 1763, the Rutherford house no longer blended quietly into Providence society. Neighbors whispered of odd noises drifting from the stone foundation, children's voices singing hymns that carried an eerie, off-key harmony. At first, people explained it away. Maybe the wind was playing tricks, maybe the servants were careless with their prayers. But when sailors walking home late at night claimed they heard laughter beneath the cobblestones, laughter that froze their blood, rumors began to spread in earnest. Benefit Street was no stranger to gossip, but the stories around Ezra Rutherford carried a darker weight. Ezra's new authority. At church, Ezra's sermons grew more extreme. He thundered about corruption seeping into families, about parents failing to protect their children from the snares of Satan. He warned of children lost to vanity, pride, and worldly games. And then his voice would lower, almost to a whisper, as he spoke of a new generation that could remain pure forever, children untainted by the filth of society. Some parishioners wept, convinced they had failed their own children. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, whispering afterward that the deacon's eyes burned with too much zeal. Still, no one dared challenge him openly. Ezra Rutherford was wealthy, respected, and deeply feared. Mercy's doubts. Meanwhile, in the basement sanctuary, Mercy Rutherford was beginning to break. Her body was pale from lack of sunlight, her spirit heavy with unease. Samuel and Judith were growing strong, but there was something unsettling in their behavior. They almost never laughed. Their play was quiet, watchful, as if they were waiting for instructions only they could hear. At times, Mercy caught them whispering in the corner, words that made no sense, syllables that sounded like a foreign tongue. When she asked what they were saying, Samuel only smiled. Judith pressed a finger to her lips and whispered, "Shush." Mercy prayed desperately at night, begging God to protect her children from whatever darkness her husband was drawing down into their lives. But she was no longer sure God was the one answering. The merchant's visit. One bitter January afternoon, Ezra's business partner, Captain Thomas Wetherell, arrived at the Rutherford home. He had come to discuss cargo shipments, but while waiting for Ezra, he noticed something strange. From the parlor, he swore he heard a child's voice drifting up through the floorboards. "Did I hear, little ones?" he asked with a smile. "I had no idea you'd been blessed so recently." Mercy froze. Ezra's command echoed in her mind. "Never reveal them. The world will corrupt them." She forced a smile. "No, Captain, you must have heard servants in the kitchen." But Captain Wetherell frowned. "Sounded too young for servants." Laughter, too, almost like. Ezra entered the room at that moment, his tall frame filling the doorway, his gray eyes piercing. "What did you say you heard?" he asked quietly. Captain Wetherell stammered, suddenly uneasy. "Oh, nothing, Deacon. Just thought I heard children, that's all." Ezra's lips curved into the faintest smile. "There are no children here." The words were calm, but the silence that followed left Wetherell uneasy for weeks. The fasting gone too far. By spring of 1764, Ezra's rituals grew harsher. He extended the family fasts, 2 days, sometimes 3. Mercy grew thin, but she endured. The twins, however, seemed untouched by hunger. While Mercy weakened, Samuel and Judith remained strangely strong, their eyes shining with a calm that unsettled her. One evening, Mercy broke. She slipped upstairs, stole a loaf of bread, and carried it down, determined to feed her children in secret. When she placed the bread before them, Samuel pushed it away. Judith folded her hands and whispered, "Father says no." Mercy's heart sank. Ezra's grip on their souls was stronger than her own. Whispers spreading. Meanwhile, Providence could no longer ignore the strangeness of the Rutherford household. Servants whispered that they heard the sound of multiple voices coming from the locked basement, though only Ezra and Mercy were known to live there. A group of boys dared each other to walk past the house after dark. They swore they saw candlelight flickering from cracks in the foundation, and one claimed he heard singing, two children's voices, harmonizing a hymn no one recognized. Fear began to spread through the community. Was Deacon Rutherford practicing some foreign religion? Had he fallen into heresy? The town elders began to whisper about investigation. Ezra's justification. Inside his journals, Ezra's writings grew darker still. He recorded that the children were progressing beyond expectation. Their bond was unbreakable, their obedience flawless. He wrote, "They are not merely innocent. They are becoming vessels, and through them, I will preserve what the Lord desires most." He no longer wrote only in English or Latin. Strange symbols filled the margins, curling shapes that matched the carvings on the beams of the basement. When Mercy confronted him, he turned cold. "You must trust, wife. These are not my words. They are given to me." "But by whom?" she whispered. Ezra only smiled. The elders arrive. In late summer of 1764, 3 church elders came to the Rutherford mansion. They arrived politely, but their questions were sharp. Why had Ezra hidden his children from the congregation? Why had he forbidden Mercy from social visits? Why did neighbors report such strange sounds from beneath the house? Ezra's reply was smooth, almost charming. He spoke of Mercy's delicate health, of rumors twisted by idle tongues, of a private faith misunderstood by those unwilling to sacrifice. But the elders were not convinced. One promised to return with authority from the colonial council. Ezra's smile did not falter. But later that night, he locked the basement door with shaking hands. Mercy's realization. That same night, Mercy awoke to whispers, louder than ever before. She turned her head and froze. Samuel and Judith were kneeling before the altar, their faces turned upward, lips moving in unison. Ezra knelt beside them, tears streaming down his face. His hands traced those strange curling symbols in the air as though sealing a pact. And in the darkness, Mercy realized the truth. Her children were no longer praying to God. Cliffhanger. The next morning, Ezra told Mercy something that made her blood run cold. "The council will come soon. They will try to separate us from the children. But we cannot allow that." His gray eyes burned with feverish light as he whispered, "If Providence will not protect them, then Providence must be sacrificed." Right finger that ends part 6. The town is beginning to suspect the truth. Mercy is trapped between loyalty and terror, and Ezra is preparing for something much darker. In part 7, the council makes its move, and the basement begins to reveal just how deep its secrets go. Part 7, the council's knock. Studio microphone hook. By the autumn of 1764, Providence could no longer ignore the strange house on Benefit Street. Whispers of hymns in the night, shadows in the windows, and a deacon whose sermons sounded more like curses than blessings, all of it reached the ears of the colonial council. And when men of authority came knocking on Ezra Rutherford's door, they were not prepared for what they would find. The knock at the door. It was October 3rd, gray and cold, when 3 councilmen arrived at the Rutherford mansion. Their boots struck the cobblestones like drumbeats of judgment. The leader, Magistrate Josiah Clark, was a stern man, respected for his fairness and feared for his temper. With him were 2 assistants, younger men who had heard the rumors and carried the nervousness of those who would rather not be there. When Ezra opened the heavy oak door, he looked taller than ever, his gaunt frame framed by shadows. His gray eyes burned with an unsettling calm. "Deacon Rutherford," Clark said, "we come on behalf of the Providence Council. There are questions that must be answered." Ezra smiled faintly. "Questions," he murmured, "are the beginning of doubt. Doubt is the seed of corruption." But he stepped aside, letting them in. The inspection. The men walked through the mansion. Upstairs, everything was immaculate, simple furniture, shelves of books, a dining room with pewter plates neatly arranged. But the servants whispered behind their hands, their faces pale. One finally blurted, "It's the basement, sirs. That's where the voices come from." Clark turned to Ezra. "You will open it." Ezra's smile never wavered. "The basement is a place of prayer. Sacred, not for the eyes of the unprepared. Open it, Clark repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Ezra studied him for a long moment. Then, with a sigh that sounded almost theatrical, he drew a heavy iron key from his robe and unlocked the door. What they found. The councilman descended into the stone chamber, lanterns in hand. At first, they were struck by the richness: Persian rugs, carved beds, shelves of books. It looked less like a nursery and more like a chapel. But then they noticed the carvings on the beams. Symbols no one recognized. Symbols that seemed to crawl when lantern light touched them. On the altar lay a Bible, but its margins were filled with dense scribbles in languages the councilman did not know. And then the twins appeared. Samuel and Judith stepped from the shadows, holding hands. Their skin was pale as candle wax, their eyes wide and gleaming. They did not flinch at the strangers. Instead, they bowed their heads in unison, murmuring something too low to hear. The youngest councilman whispered, "God preserve us." Ezra's defense. Ezra lifted his hands. "You see before you the fruit of obedience. Children unspoiled by the world. Children who know no sin. Tell me, councilman, is that not the dream of every parent? To keep innocence whole." Clark's jaw tightened. Children are meant to live in the world, not beneath it. This is no sanctuary. This is imprisonment. Ezra's voice sharpened. The world corrupts. I have done what no man in Providence had the courage to do. I have preserved purity itself. Judith's lips moved again. Samuel echoed her, their voices rising in a strange chant. The sound filled the basement, pressing against the stone walls until the councilman's lanterns flickered. Clark raised a hand to silence them. Enough. These children will be brought into the light. They will live as God intended. Ezra's calm broke. His face twisted, and his voice thundered through the chamber. You would tear them from salvation and cast them into filth. Then you are no better than the harlots and drunkards who roam this city. The twins' chant grew louder. The councilmen clutched their ears as the sound seemed to vibrate inside their skulls. The escape upstairs. Mercy, pale and trembling, rushed forward. Please, do not anger him further. She begged Clark. The magistrate seized her arm. Goodwife, has this man forced you into silence? Mercy hesitated. Tears welled in her eyes. But before she could answer, Ezra roared, his voice so loud it rattled the lantern glass. No one leaves this place without my blessing. The councilman drew back. Clark pushed Mercy toward the stairs. Up, now. As they stumbled into the parlor above, Clark turned back. Deacon, the council will return. With soldiers if need be. Your secrets will not remain hidden. Ezra's laughter followed them up the stairs, hollow and echoing, like something more than human. The aftermath. When the councilman left, Ezra locked the basement door again. His hands trembled, but his eyes glowed with feverish light. They will come again, he whispered. And when they do, Providence will learn what it means to mock the chosen. Mercy sank to her knees, clutching the twins. Ezra, please, end this before it's too late. He looked at her with pity, almost tenderness. Too late, my dear, it has only just begun. Providence reacts. The next Sunday, Clark stood before the congregation at the First Baptist Church. He did not give details, but his warning was clear: there are practices among us that twist the word of God. Beware those who lock their faith behind stone walls. Beware those who claim purity while hiding darkness. The congregation murmured. Some nodded, already suspicious of Ezra. Others shook their heads, unwilling to believe their respected deacon could fall so far. But rumors spread faster than sermons. Soon, all of Providence buzzed with talk of children hidden in cellars, of chants in unknown tongues, of Ezra Rutherford making pacts with powers no one dared name aloud. The twins' transformation. Meanwhile, in the locked basement, Samuel and Judith had begun to change in ways Mercy could no longer deny. Their voices carried strange harmonies, too complex for children. Their eyes glimmered in the lamplight with an intelligence that seemed older than their years. One night, as Mercy tucked them into bed, Samuel whispered, "Mother, the walls are listening." Judith added, "But do not be afraid. They are our friends. Mercy's hands shook as she drew the blanket over them. For the first time, she prayed not just for her children's safety, but for their souls. Ezra's final resolve. Ezra spent long nights pacing the basement, scribbling in his journals, carving more symbols into the beams. They think they can take you, he murmured to the twins. But you are mine, mine to preserve, mine to protect, and if Providence comes for us, then Providence will bleed. The twins nodded silently, their pale faces calm, as though they already understood. Cliffhanger. 1 week later, as dusk fell over Benefit Street, the sound of marching boots echoed through the neighborhood. The council had returned, this time with armed men. Inside the Rutherford house, Ezra waited at the locked basement door, one hand on the iron key, the other on the Bible scrawled with symbols. His lips moved in a prayer that did not sound like any prayer ever spoken in Providence. And beneath his feet, Samuel and Judith began to sing. The sound rose like smoke through the floorboards, high, haunting, and impossibly loud. The soldiers hesitated on the doorstep, crossing themselves in fear. For they had never heard children's voices sound like that. Right finger that ends part 7. The council has returned with force, the twins are no longer simply children, and Ezra is preparing to unleash whatever has been growing beneath his home. In part 8, the confrontation begins, and the basement itself may turn against those who dare to enter. Part 8, The Siege of Benefit Street. Studio microphone hook. Providence had whispered about Ezra Rutherford for months. But in the winter of 1764, whispers turned to shouts. The council would no longer tolerate secrets locked beneath stone floors. Soldiers marched to Ezra's door, lanterns and muskets in hand, ready to drag truth into daylight. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that the basement beneath Ezra's home was no longer just stone and mortar. It had become something alive. And when the soldiers crossed the threshold, Providence itself trembled. The soldiers arrive. The boots of 10 armed men struck the cobblestones like a drumbeat of judgment. Lanterns swung in the cold wind, casting long shadows across the Rutherford house. Magistrate Clark led them, his jaw set in grim determination. Behind him, townsfolk gathered at a distance, clutching shawls and coats tight. No one dared step closer, but no one looked away. Tonight, Clark declared, this ends. The soldiers raised their muskets. The heavy knock shook Ezra's oak door. Ezra's welcome. The door creaked open, and there stood Ezra Rutherford. His black robe hung loose on his thin frame, his eyes blazing with strange light. Magistrate, he said softly, you bring fire into a holy place. Do you not fear burning yourselves? Clark pushed past him. Your holiness is a prison. We've seen the children. We know enough. Ezra didn't move to stop them. Instead, he stepped aside, his voice low but carrying through the hall. Enter, then, but know this, you walk not into a house, but into a covenant. The soldiers crossed the threshold. The air inside felt thicker, heavier, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Mercy's plea. In the parlor, Mercy knelt with Samuel and Judith at her side. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. Please, she whispered to Clark, do not harm them. They are only children. The twins raised their eyes. Samuel's pupils seemed darker than before, Judith's smile too calm for her years. Clark's voice softened, just for her. Good wife, we mean to save them. Trust us. Ezra's laughter cut through the room like a blade. Save them. From what? From innocence. From purity unspoiled. He stretched his arms wide. No, you come to destroy, and destruction will be answered. The basement door. Clark gestured. 2 men, downstairs. Search it all. Bring back what you find. The soldiers obeyed, descending the narrow staircase into the basement. Their lanterns bobbed in the darkness until they reached the stone floor below. There they saw the altar, the carved beams, the books filled with strange symbols. But the strangest thing was the sound. A faint hum, like wind through a hollow bone, rose from the walls themselves. One soldier whispered, "Do you hear that?" The other nodded, his face pale. "It's singing. The singing walls." The hum grew louder, shaping itself into words no man could understand. The stone walls seemed to pulse with sound, their carvings glowing faintly. The soldiers raised their lanterns, and shadows stretched too far, bending in ways no light should make them bend. Suddenly, one lantern burst, glass shattering, flame sputtering out. Darkness swallowed half the room. The soldier screamed as something unseen brushed past his arm, cold as ice, sharp as claws. They stumbled up the stairs, shouting, "The walls are alive!" The walls. But when they reached the parlor, they fell silent. Their eyes were wide, their mouths open, yet no words came. Clark shook them. "Speak, man." Only a rasp came out, like breath on a tomb. Dash dash dash. The twins' song. Samuel and Judith stood hand in hand. Their voices rose in perfect harmony, a melody both beautiful and unbearable. The soldiers clutched their ears, faces contorted in pain. One dropped his musket, another fell to his knees. Ezra lifted his arms like a conductor, his face shining with ecstasy. "Sing, my children, let Providence hear the truth." The song grew louder, echoing through the house, spilling out into the street. Townsfolk outside gasped, crossing themselves, some fleeing, others rooted in terror. It was not just music. It was command. Dash dash dash. Clark's defiance. Clark staggered forward, musket raised. "Enough. In the name of God, I end this madness." He fired. The shot cracked through the parlor, smoke filling the air. Judith did not move. The bullet struck the wall behind her, embedding harmlessly in the stone. She smiled at Clark, tilting her head. "God listens to us, not you." Clark's hands shook. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Dash dash dash. Mercy's breaking point. Mercy screamed, rushing to her children. She clutched them, tears streaming down her face. "Ezra, stop this, please. They are just children, they don't understand what they're doing." Ezra's voice was calm, almost tender. "They understand more than you ever will. They are chosen, Mercy. And through them, the world will be remade." She turned to Clark, desperate. "Take us away. Take me and the children. Just, don't leave us here with him." Ezra's eyes blazed. "You would betray your covenant. You, whom God chose to carry these vessels." The air grew hotter, the walls trembling as if in anger. Dash dash dash. The house awakens. The floorboards groaned. Dust fell from the ceiling. The entire house seemed to shudder, as though it were breathing. One soldier cried out as his musket grew too hot to hold, the metal searing his skin. Another was flung against the wall by an unseen force, his body striking with a sickening crack. The lanterns flickered, their flames bending toward the twins as though drawn to them. Ezra's voice thundered. "This house is consecrated. It will not bow to unbelievers." The house roared in answer. Dash dash dash. Flight and fire. "Out!" Clark shouted. "Everyone out!" The remaining soldiers dragged their wounded comrades toward the door. The townsfolk outside screamed as smoke began seeping from the windows, though no fire had yet been set. Inside, Mercy clutched Samuel and Judith, torn between her husband's madness and the soldiers' fear. "Mother," Samuel whispered, "don't be afraid. We will sing for you." Judith added, her voice soft but chilling, "and then everything will be quiet." Mercy's heart froze. She pulled them tighter, whispering prayers under her breath. Dash dash dash. Cliffhanger. As the last soldier stumbled into the street, Clark turned back toward the house. Through the open door, he saw Ezra standing tall, his children at his side, their song shaking the very walls. Mercy was on her knees, clutching them, caught between love and terror. And then the door slammed shut with a thunderous boom. The lock clicked. The Rutherford house stood silent, smoke curling from its chimney, windows dark. But from deep within its stone belly, faint singing still rose, soft, sweet, and utterly inhuman. Clark whispered to the townsfolk. "Providence is damned, unless we burn that house to the ground." Dash dash dash. Right finger. That's part 8. The soldiers have been driven out, the twins' power is undeniable, and Ezra's house itself has become a living fortress. In part 9, the council must decide: destroy the Rutherford home and everyone inside, or risk letting the evil spread. Dash dash dash. Would you like me to make part 9 the burning of the house, episode, or should the council try another confrontation before fire becomes the only option? Part 9 Fire on Benefit Street. Studio microphone hook. For weeks, the Rutherford house loomed like a curse over Providence. No one dared walk too close. At night, windows glowed with strange light, and neighbors swore they heard children singing, soft, sweet, and utterly unnatural. The council knew what had to be done. If bullets couldn't pierce the twins' protection, if prayer couldn't break Ezra's covenant, then only one weapon remained: fire. But what happens when you try to burn a house that breathes? The decision. The town council met in secret at the White Horse Tavern, their faces pale, their voices hushed. Magistrate Clark, still shaken from the failed raid, stood at the head of the table. "We've seen the truth," he said. "The house is alive. The twins command it. If we do nothing, that corruption will spread through Providence like plague." One elder trembled. "You speak of burning a man of God alive in his home." Clark slammed his fist on the table. "A man of God? No, Ezra Rutherford is a jailer, and those children are not what they seem." At last, after hours of fearful debate, the vote was unanimous. The house must burn. Gathering the crowd. On the night chosen for the deed, December 12, 1764, lanterns filled Benefit Street. A crowd gathered, hundreds strong, armed with pitchforks, muskets, and torches. The people moved with grim purpose, though fear clung to them like frost. Mothers clutched rosaries, fathers muttered prayers under their breath. Children were kept indoors, windows shuttered tight. At the front marched Clark and the council, their torches blazing. Behind them came the militia, carrying barrels of tar and oil. The air was bitter cold, yet sweat beaded on every brow. Tonight would decide Providence's fate. The house awaits. When they reached the Rutherford home, the crowd stopped as one. The house stood utterly still, its windows black, its doors shut tight. No lanterns glowed within, no smoke rose from the chimney. And yet, the townsfolk swore they felt eyes upon them, hundreds of eyes, watching from cracks and keyholes. A baby's laugh drifted faintly from inside. The crowd shuddered. Clark raised his torch high. "By authority of Providence, this house and all within are condemned. We burn it now." Ezra's voice. Before the first spark touched tar, a voice boomed from within. "Neighbors, friends." It was Ezra Rutherford, his words rolling out like thunder. "You come to destroy what God has blessed. You call innocence corruption, purity evil. But you do this because you cannot bear to see souls untainted by your filth." The door opened slowly. Ezra stood in the doorway, a shadow against the dim light behind him. Beside him, Samuel and Judith held hands. Their eyes gleamed like mirrors. "If you strike this house," Ezra said, "you strike at heaven itself." The first flames. Clark did not falter. He gave the order, and militiamen hurled their torches onto the tar-soaked walls. Flame leapt high, crackling, spreading fast along the wooden frame. The crowd cheered in grim relief, until the house answered back. The fire bent. The flames twisted upward, then sideways, wrapping around windows as though repelled. Smoke poured not from the wood but from the ground itself, thick and choking. The torches sputtered, dying in the men's hands. A terrible laugh echoed through the street, not from Ezra, but from the house itself. Mercy's cry. Suddenly, Mercy appeared at an upstairs window. Her hair was wild, her face streaked with tears. "Help us," she screamed. "For the love of God, help my children." She pressed her hands against the glass as if to break through, but something yanked her backward. She vanished into the shadows, her scream cut short. The crowd gasped. Mothers covered their faces. Clark tightened his grip on his musket. "She's alive in there," someone whispered. "We can't." Clark's jaw hardened. "We must." The song of the twins. Then came the singing. Soft at first, almost gentle, a lullaby that floated through the smoke. Samuel and Judith's voices twined together, sweet and perfect. But the longer it played, the more unbearable it became. The notes pressed against the crowd like invisible hands, pushing, twisting. Men dropped their muskets, clutching their heads. Women sobbed. Some fell to their knees, begging forgiveness without knowing why. One soldier turned his musket on himself, pulling the trigger before anyone could stop him. Ezra raised his arms in triumph. Do you see? Their voices are judgment, and you have judged yourselves guilty. Clark's resolve. Clark fought through the song, his teeth gritted, blood trickling from his ears. No, he growled, not judgment, not purity. This is corruption. He seized a barrel of oil, smashing it open at the Rutherford doorstep. He plunged his torch deep inside, then hurled the burning mess into the hall. This time, the flames caught. The entryway roared with fire. The crowd screamed as the house lit from within, smoke billowing black against the winter sky. For the first time, Ezra faltered. The fire spreads. The blaze grew monstrous, climbing the walls, devouring windows. Beams cracked, glass shattered, shingles rained down like fiery hail. From within came shrieks, Mercy's voice, pleading, begging. Then Ezra's roar of fury. Then the twins' song, louder, sharper, piercing through the crackle of fire. The sound shook the very cobblestones. Some swore the earth trembled beneath their feet. Still, Clark shouted above the chaos, hold the fire. Do not stop until the house is ash. The final sight. Through the flames, the crowd saw one last vision. At the top window, Ezra stood with Samuel and Judith at his side. His robe was aflame, yet he did not burn. The children glowed like embers, their faces calm, their voices strong. Providence will remember us, Ezra cried. This covenant cannot be undone. Then the floor beneath him gave way. The three figures plunged into the inferno below. The house collapsed in a roar of fire and stone. Silence. When dawn broke, nothing remained but smoking ruins. The Rutherford house was gone, reduced to ash and blackened stone. The townsfolk stood in stunned silence. Some wept, some prayed, others turned their backs and walked away, determined never to speak of it again. Only Clark remained, staring at the ruins with hollow eyes. It is done, he whispered. But deep inside, he knew it wasn't. Because as the ashes cooled, faint and distant, the sound of children singing still drifted through the morning air. Right finger. That's part 9. The burning of the Rutherford house, a violent attempt to end Ezra's twisted covenant. In part 10, the finale, what survived the fire, how Providence tried to bury the truth, and why the legend of the singing children still haunts Benefit Street centuries later. Part 10, the ashes of innocence. Studio microphone hook. The Rutherford house burned to the ground on a bitter December night in 1764. Flames swallowed its beams, its walls, its secrets. But fire doesn't destroy everything. Some things linger, beneath ash, beneath earth, beneath memory. For centuries, Providence tried to bury the truth. But on Benefit Street, the whispers never stopped. And even now, if you walk past the site where Ezra Rutherford's house once stood, you may hear them too. This is the final chapter of the Covenant of Fire. After the flames, when the last embers cooled, the townsfolk sifted through the ruins. What they found chilled them more than the winter air. In the ashes of the basement altar lay two small impressions, shapes in the soot, like bodies that had been present but left no remains. Samuel and Judith. No bones, no flesh, just outlines, as though the fire itself could not claim them. Of Ezra, only fragments of his robe remained, the fabric blackened yet curiously intact, as if it had resisted burning until the very last moment. And Mercy, not a trace. Some swore she had escaped, fleeing into the night. Others believed she perished in the flames. But no body was ever recovered. The town's silence. The council moved quickly. Records of the Rutherford family were sealed, their names struck from official rolls. Anyone who spoke of the twins was warned, or worse. The burned lot was left empty, its stone foundation crumbling into weeds. But silence is never perfect. Children whispered of seeing pale faces in the ruins. Sailors claimed to hear hymns drifting over the harbor on foggy nights. Goodwife Prescott, the midwife who had delivered the twins, left Providence altogether. On her deathbed years later, she confessed to her daughter that she had never seen children more alert, more strange than Samuel and Judith. They were listening before they could even open their eyes, she said. By 1800, the legend had already taken root, the house where the children sang beneath the floorboards. A new century, old whispers. In the early 1800s, a wealthy merchant purchased the land and built a grand home atop the ruins. He lasted 3 weeks. His journals, later found in an attic trunk, described nights filled with scratches beneath the floor, and the soft sound of children praying in voices not their own. The next family lasted only 10 days. Their youngest daughter woke screaming, insisting that the boy and girl in the cellar wanted her to come play. By the 1830s, Benefit Street residents avoided the property entirely. Horses balked at passing it. Neighbors claimed strange lights flickered in the ground at night, as if fire still smoldered below. The Civil War era. During the Civil War, the abandoned lot became a camp for deserters and drifters. One soldier later wrote that he had taken shelter in the basement ruins on a stormy night. He described a glowing altar, intact despite the collapse of the house, and 2 children kneeling before it, their faces white as bone. They were singing, he wrote, but the words were not English, nor any tongue I know. When they turned toward me, their eyes were hollow, and their mouths opened too wide. He fled before dawn and never returned to Providence. Attempts at forgetting. In the late 1800s, the city paved over much of Benefit Street. The Rutherford Foundation was filled with stone and dirt, the site finally built over with row houses. For a time, the whispers quieted. But not completely. Residents reported oil lamp smells drifting through walls. Children woke at night, claiming to hear songs beneath their beds. One tenant in 1894 reported feeling small hands grip my ankles as she crossed her parlor floor. She moved out within a month. 20th century shadows. By the 20th century, the legend of the singing children was firmly established. Local schoolchildren dared each other to knock on the doors of the houses that stood where Rutherford's mansion had once been. In 1932, a team from Brown University attempted to excavate the site, hoping to uncover colonial artifacts. What they uncovered instead were fragments of carved stone, symbols that matched no known religious tradition. When photographs of the carvings were developed, the negatives appeared warped, streaked with light that seemed to twist into human shapes. The photographs were quietly suppressed. The artifacts vanished into storage. Modern times. Today, the site of the Rutherford House is just another building on Benefit Street. Tourists walk past it every day, admiring the colonial architecture, never knowing what lies beneath. But locals know. Some refuse to step foot on that block after dark. Others claim that when the wind blows in from the harbor, you can hear faint singing rising from the cobblestones. And every few years, without fail, a new tenant reports the same experience, the sensation of children brushing against their legs in the night, the flicker of oil lamps in sealed rooms, the smell of burning wood that never quite fades. The covenant remains. Ezra Rutherford believed he had struck a covenant with heaven itself. The fire destroyed his house, but perhaps not the covenant. Maybe the twins were never meant to grow into ordinary children. Maybe their voices were always meant to outlast stone, fire, even time itself. Providence tried to forget, tried to seal records, bury ruins, pave streets, and move on. But the city could never truly escape. Because some devotions do not die. They echo. And on quiet nights, they still sing. Studio microphone closing call to action. And that brings us to the end of the story of Deacon Ezra Rutherford, the singing children of Benefit Street, and the house that became a tomb. But tell me, if you were walking down Benefit Street tonight, and you heard children's voices drifting from the cobblestones, would you stop and listen, or would you run? Drop your answer in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your fellow mystery lovers, and subscribe so you never miss another chilling story from America's haunted past. Because history doesn't just live in books, it lives in the whispers, the shadows, and sometimes, beneath your very feet.